much, Niamh. So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our second Talking Tourism of our winter season with Venture North. Delighted to see so many people in the room. And I look forward to more over the winter period. So today is one of our most popular Talking Tourism for obvious reasons, and so really delighted. I think this is about the third time, Philip, you've come along to Venture North to let us know how things have been going in the summer season, specifically with the Access Rangers. So if you haven't met Philip before, I would like to introduce Philip Waite from the Highland Council, who is our Outdoor Access Manager. Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Kathy. Yes, and hello, everybody. I think I know one or two people, and I hope some of you may have met the Rangers over the summer. And I will just share the presentation now. Hopefully it will come on screen. I get a thumbs up from somebody. Just make sure that you're seeing that. Yep, great. Thank you. Right then. So as Kathy said, we had a small number of rangers in place in Sutherland only this year, and I'll speak about that a little bit more as we go through the presentation. And yeah, that's the fourth year that we've had rangers now, really since the pandemic. So started in 2021, 22, 23, and then this year. So moving in, obviously a nice photo over to Ben Loyal and the Kyle Tongue to start with, and I've got to just figure out how I am. Yeah, hold on a second. It's trying to work between screens and being able to toggle between them. This isn't where I want to be yet. Okay, right. Now I'm not going to be able to see you whilst I'm showing the presentation, unfortunately. Right. So, as I mentioned, just a small team this year due to a change in the funding mechanism. The funding that we had received for the first 3 years from the Scottish Government through Nature Scot had ceased, as that was seen as COVID recovery funds. There was also input directly from council funds for the first 2 years, again, as a COVID recovery measure. But this year, that funding had all ceased as well. So the Sutherland Area Committee had realised that the importance of the Ranger Service to their area, and had found a way of using some of the funds through the community regeneration funding, and suggested that I put in an application for a small team to cover their area. So we started off with 4 rangers covering the Sutherland, although we did lose one of them at the end of July. So for 2 months we had 4, and then managed with 3 rangers covering the area through July, August, September and October. You'll see that. I'll go through some of the things that I've mentioned previously, just as a reminder. So obviously the Ranger Service has this recognisable logo, which is nationwide, and so is recognised by people that come visiting, or should be, as their local service will also have a similar logo. And the role that the Rangers play, a reminder of that. See the primary role to promote, encourage responsible access, to engage with visitors, patrol that area, and monitor the activities and produce reports. It's also equally important to develop relationships locally with land managers, other organisations, and communities. And where possible, sort of midweek, they would undertake some site maintenance and monitor core paths. But this is a role that will also continue through the winter, when the visitor management work reduces, but they will be doing more maintenance work on a part-time basis rather than full-time. Again, I'm just, there we go, difficulty finding the right buttons. So this year, these are the areas that the Rangers covered. As mentioned, unfortunately, no ranger in Caithness, but we had Florence in the east, and then Chaz in the north. He's returned for the third year. And then in the west, we had Steve. He was the ranger that just stayed with us for 2 months, and Cameron covered Ascent. So the bit of a change when Steve left was that Cameron went up to the far northwest on a Saturday and Sunday, covering a much bigger area, and Chaz went across to the northwest on a Tuesday. So still getting at least 3 days cover in a week, but split between the two ranges in the north and west. The green dots, by the way, are the sites that the rangers have reported on. I know that seems a continuous amount of green dots in Ascent because the sites vary in size. Some are sort of quite large, or car parks, or well known. Others may just be little pull-ins or lay-bys on the side of the road. So the dot gives no real indication of the size of the site, but just locations that the rangers have reported on at some point. So some of the hotspots, of which many of you will be aware of, but these are ones that keep coming up time and time again with some activity on them, whether that be lots of motorhomes parked or camping, fires, outdoor toileting. But these are the ones that are really checked every patrol and reported on. I won't go through them all. You can see them there, and as I say, you'll probably be familiar with many of them. So the actual monitoring that they do when they go out on site, they have this form on their phone, which they can. Most of it's a tick box, but they write in sort of any information that they note at the time. This then they can send off for every site, and this is all collated by the senior ranger and then myself to produce reports on a weekly basis, which we then collate up to the report that you're about to see now. There are some caveats on this data, of course. It can't be 100% accurate because we're not out 24/7. So the rangers just record these figures on 3 days a week, a Friday, Saturday, and a Sunday usually. But as I mentioned, the Northwest, we found that a Tuesday was often a busy day in that area. And so instead of a Friday, it's done on a Tuesday in the far Northwest corner. There are advantages and disadvantages to that, but at least it does get this consistency in every area that is the days that it's checked. Over the weekends, again, has its advantages and disadvantages because it may include local visitors or day visitors, weekenders. So that may bump up the figures slightly, but on the flip side, for those sort of that are staying in accommodation, it can be a changeover day, and so it may lose some in that sense. So in a way, we hope that balances out. There is the possibility of some double counting if people do move between areas over a course of a weekend. And of course, a ranger, if they spot the same one, may remember not to count it again. But if it goes into a different ranger's area, there is the possibility of some double counting. But it's try to keep that to a minimum. There were some changes to the areas covered this year. With it being Sutherland only, we couldn't. The rangers couldn't recross area boundaries. In the past, one of the rangers in the west was covering Coirgh and Ascent, and so we had to reduce the Coirgh amount. So we still did include a little bit of Inverpolly, but not the Achiltibuie area. And likewise in the east, the ranger previously covered East Ross and Sutherland, and of course the Rosh a bit was kept to a minimum, but the focus was really on the East Sutherland area. I've already mentioned that the team was reduced for half a season, which may obviously be reflected in reductions in the numbers of patrols. And then, of course, there's always the human factor variation. Some rangers focus more on some activities. They may take more time to count fires or outdoor toileting, and some may be more sociable and talk to more people. So there is this possible variation between years. And even between areas. So with this sort of in mind, you've got to keep these sort of factors in mind when looking at the data, that there can be this variation. Another variation is the fact that in each year, the Rangers have started in a different month. This year, they started at the beginning of June, and it seems to be getting later every year, as you can see on that it was April in 22 and May in 23. And that's just a consequence of when the funding becomes available and we can get the Rangers in position. So the data for this year then, for 2024, I hope you can see some of those figures. It may be a bit small, but the one thing to point out is where the boxes are highlighted yellow, these are figures that are higher this year than last year. So you can still see in some activity, some recording, and some areas, there are still increases on the previous year. There are some things that have decreased, and we'll go through that, but some have certainly increased. To do a more direct comparison between this year and the last 2 years, we've got these figures here. Again, just looking at this year, the yellow highlight show where figures are higher this year. And what I would really like to point out is the columns in green, where I've done the average number of motorhomes or recreational vehicles, as we sort of shorten it to, and tents per patrol. So the numbers of patrols, as I mentioned, are a bit lower this year because of the later start and fewer Rangers. So averaging that out, we can then get a more direct comparison to how that sort of shows up between the years. We'll see that, generally speaking, the number of tents is certainly decreasing year on year, but the number of motorhomes is increasing. Some areas more so than others, but that seems to be the pattern that seems to be following, that motorhomes and camper vans are still increasing, perhaps slower than they were initially, but it's still going up, whereas tents is reducing. And there's just such a variation on the other matters. In some areas, fires have increased, in other areas, considerably fewer. And it's the same with toileting and dumping. It's a bit of a mixed picture. One thing that certainly has increased the number of roof tents that are showing up. You've maybe seen that yourself, that these are becoming more and more popular. So this year, right across the board, we can see that the number of roof tents that have been counted has increased. Also seems to be an increase on more factors on the east coast than the west coast. And we're wondering if that might be the fact that more people now, especially if they're repeating doing the North Coast 500, are going east to west rather than perhaps what was more usually the case from west to east. And this is why perhaps people are starting off in the east and then maybe staying overnight, and then causing these figures to rise. So analysing those figures in more detail and seeing how they compare, and in a more visual way, so you can see how that reflects. Excuse me. So the number of people spoken to, these are just the positive outcomes. You'll have noticed in that graph, the data previously, that we also record some negative encounters. Fortunately, they have decreased this year. But anyway, with the positive ones, we can see that there is a bit of a decrease from last year. Again, that's likely to be due to the reduction in the number of patrols and the number of staff, but they're still fairly high figures. And in fact, in Assynt and Inverpolly, the figure has increased in the number of people spoken to. However, with parked cars, it seems to be a different picture. So these are cars that are in countryside car parks and by the side of the road in verges and lay-bys, not the ones in the villages and towns. So again, it shows that pattern of more in the east than the west that I was mentioning. So going on to the issues that the Rangers really try to attend to, and really, as I say, the primary focus is on, well, being the Outdoor Access Rangers and I'm the manager, that we focus on the aspects that are under the Outdoor Access Code, and primary amongst that is camping. And so any camping that is really inappropriate and contrary to the Outdoor Access Code, the Rangers are really get straight in there and talk to these people. So a couple of bad examples here, right in the road verge, obviously very inappropriate and a risk to the people themselves. Not only that, you can see another mistake they've done, that not only had a disposable barbecue, which we don't really condone, and melted their own cool box by putting it on top of there. Here, I think this is close to a cemetery, but also, even if that was just a car park, the fact that this tent is huge and well above what is recommended in the Outdoor Access Code. It should be small numbers, small tents, and for a small period of time. So just next one. And here, you'll perhaps recognise, as it Culdra House near Ardwreck, and just constantly getting people camping near the historic building, and again contrary to the access code. And another one which is parked just off a car park. The problem here also is that this person's driven off road and onto someone's land, which we'll probably be saying more about later on in the presentation. And again, near cemetery, and the fact that there are no camping signs, and the fact that they drove off road, many reasons why that's contrary to the code. And so the ranger will have had a little word with them and asked them to think about it and move on. Yeah, and another example here, again, too large a group just off road. And not only that, but as you can see, quite a mess left behind. And within that fire, there was all sorts of rubbish that was half burned. Oh, somebody got a mic on. I'm hearing myself repeated. Right, I think it's off now. Great. Yeah, so a particularly bad example there. So as I mentioned, tent numbers seem to be decreasing across the board, still well above pre-COVID levels, and still, as you can see, a number of issues that really need brought to attention. But there is this pattern of a slow decline in the numbers that we are seeing. Another factor which, of course, causes great annoyance and inconsideration is things that are just abandoned. The numbers we found this year were very low, just 3, but these are the occasions where tents were just left behind. And in one occasion, which you see on the bottom left there, all of that was left behind, including the paddleboard or sit-on canoe. And it's just unbelievable what we left behind. We do retain this stuff if anybody does find that they've left it by mistake, or something untoward happened, so they can get in touch with us to recover it, but no one has so far. And at the end of the season, we do try to pass on any reusable equipment to charities, or actually this year it was to a scout group, to make use of it. Some of it, though, as you think, this one in the top left, probably went in the bin if it was just a bit of a mangled tent. Of course, there's other things that are left behind, lots of litter, and there's camping equipment in there as well, just stuffed into a rock, which pretty bad behaviour. And there was even this caravan abandoned, which was removed by environmental health. All the number plates and identifying factors were taken off it, and somebody just decided to leave it behind. So other factors, some of which associated with camping off-site, but can also be just people as they're traveling. See outdoor toileting, something really don't want to be seeing very much of. So I'll just flick through the next couple of pictures quickly because they're not particularly pleasant. There's motorhome waste dumping, which we'll come on to a bit later, but also more directly human waste. And the amount that was found generally quite low in the west and the north, but this huge increase in the east. Now, this can be a reflection of what I was saying earlier about more people starting in the east and perhaps more overnight stays in the east, but also could be a factor of one of the rangers just spending more time finding this stuff. So taking that into account, because that is a huge increase found on the East Coast, which we can't fully explain. As for fires, you'll see there's quite a decrease in the number that we found this year. Still relatively high numbers, particularly in the west, but this gradual decline. It could be a reflection of a colder, wetter summer. As you may recall, last year was quite warm and dry and more of a risk, particularly in the early summer. But these are the figures this year showing quite a reduction. It may also be the fact that more people are using fireballs, which is at least showing a degree of responsibility. And as long as they don't leave a mess behind, are much less of a risk to creating wildfires. And we can see the number of fires that have been put out by the Rangers is also significantly decreased. In fact, with none in the east and the north, and smaller numbers in the west. But when it does come to fires, obviously we do the best we can to reduce the impact. So I'll show a little sort of picture story here. This was last year, where a fire site was repaired by last year's ranger. I think this is near Inverkirkegg in the west. And then this year, this happened, making pretty bad scar. And then the ranger came in after they left and had obviously had a strong word with them, but then does the best to try to repair the damage and make it known to others not to make that worse. So other sites where fire marks have appeared, and again not really being appreciated, as the Smoo Cave, you recognise, and using bits of the fencing on the fire. Ardrett Castle, obviously a popular spot, as many of you will know, and constantly has a number of fire sites. And then there's another couple of pictures here. This is from Skelbo Forest. So I think Laura's on the call. I don't know if we may have sent this one through to you, but so that was the site that the ranger found. And then this was Florence, and she took away the litter and the unburnt wood and tried to cover that up as much as possible so that it wouldn't act as any encouragement to any future visitors that might want to light a fire. Moving on to waste and litter, again, something that many of you will have seen reported. And again, this amount of litter is probably a consequence of us not having those seasonal waste assistance that we had for the first 2 years after COVID, where the council employed people to come along and top and remove these full bins and replace them with empty bins in between visits by the rubbish trucks. So without that, these bins soon get overflowing. So the rangers, when they do see this, they will take away any of this litter that's sort of bagged beside it and sort of take the first couple of inches off the bin, so at least can be closed. But that won't last long. So we report these to waste, and they do try to get to them as soon as they can. They were a bit short-staffed this year as well, so it did lead to particular problems in a number of places. With even the rubbish trucks not going out quite as frequently as they would have liked. So, with the rangers on patrol, they try to remove as much of this excess litter as they can. And of course, then with that excess litter, you can sometimes get this sort of happening. It's spread out, whether that's by wind or by birds. But the ranger will then clear that up. And of course, if the ranger wasn't around, that would be even worse. So at the end of each patrol, that's typically what the back of a ranger's van looks like, with several bags of rubbish, some fire waste, and then take those along to a tip or recycling centre afterwards. So the number of litter collected sort of in some areas is kind of holding steady. Other areas are showing a bit of a decline, particularly perhaps in the west, but on the north and east, it seems to be settling to a sort of very common pattern. Sorry, I'm having to feel getting my mouse in the right place if you're wondering what the delay is. So off-road parking, I mentioned earlier that one in the top left being off-site, but some other examples there where they've driven even further again onto land which without consent, and often putting up a tent, which is obviously there are no access rights to drive your car off-road, which some people seem to have a misunderstanding about. And so we do speak to these people and try and get them to move to a more appropriate place. And of course, in the worst case, this is what happens, and especially if this is done time and time again, but erosion and muddy tracks of the land is just unacceptable. Roof tents, I mentioned, there's this increase certainly across the board in areas. So some of them are just on the side of the road in a lay-by, which is illegal under Roads Act to cause an encampment on a lay-by, which is part of the road infrastructure. So these people will be informed of that. But then there's the off-road version as well. Again, as mentioned, it's going onto land without consent in a vehicle. And so, yeah, we have to make sure these people they're aware of that. Sometimes it's just inconsiderate in a car park. Again, the car parks generally are part of the road infrastructure, but it's inconsiderate to the people that might want to use that car park, taking up extra space. And another example of that. So the numbers of roof tents, as I mentioned earlier, just are increasing, particularly in the north and west, but right across all the areas, Sutherland. And so we'll probably expect this to increase further. And motorhomes, as mentioned, that their numbers are slowly increasing still, whether that's personal ones or hired. I think there are an increasing number of hire companies. And some motorhome users are very responsible and others not so. So we get a mixture across the board. And depending on where they are parked and what the occurrence is, the rangers will try to speak to as many of them possible. Some of you will be aware that we have leaflets. There's the Great Venture North one, which shows a map of facilities. So we'll use either the council's generic one or the Venture North leaflet as a conversation starter and make sure this information is passed on to all these motorhome users. And the numbers there reflected a little bit of a decline in the west, but an increase in the north and east, and overall a general increase. And the number of waste being disposed of shows a little bit of a decline on last year, but you know what these things are, sort of fairly sizable tanks with several days toileting in it. It's never going to be pleasant, and even one of these by the roadside is too many. So we report these to environmental health, and they will try to cover it. I mean, at the moment there isn't a specialized team to do a full removal, so often it's really just covered in sand. So it's not really dealt with very effectively. And yeah, of course, if they are left unattended, then provides a health risk to people and animals. So other jobs that the Rangers get on with in between patrols on the 2 days, as well as sort of making contacts with land managers and communities, they'll get on with some repair works. So the fence at Smoo Cave, I don't think it was all done by that fire we saw earlier, but it probably didn't help that some of the fence was broken. But the Rangers went in and repaired that. And I've been told recently that it's down again, so we are wondering whether it's not just wind, but it may be some human element to this fence constantly being broken down. But we'll be repairing it again over the winter. Another job's maybe here where the path is getting encroached by the vegetation. I'll just knock that back so that it's a little bit more accessible. And these are the sorts of jobs that will be done more frequently over the winter. Oh, there's another photo that came up, but unfortunately it went behind this, but it was repairing of a fence. So that sometime, or we'll be doing that sort of thing on fencing and gates styles where required. So looking at some specific sites and ones that I mentioned last year, it's kind of giving an update on what's happened to them this year. So two of these sites, well, probably all three that I'm going to mention, really became popular due to social media, Facebook posts on the North Coast 500. I'm sure some of you are aware there's a lot of information sharing. And one particular that's really came out of nowhere was this Wailing Widow's waterfall. Whilst it's close to Britain's highest waterfall, just to the that drops into Glencool. This one by the roadside, obviously a little bit more accessible, so more people seem to be interested in it. You'll see there's a number of green dots of the sites. So there was some, there's a car park at the P, or actually it's more of a lay-by. I'll go to the photos. So this one on the bottom left, which would provide reasonable parking, but that soon gets full. And then people then want to be parking closer to where the site is anyway. So down the top two show parking from a previous year, which can cause a bit of a road safety risk, as you can see on the top left, with overtaking, and that's close to a bend. So there's maybe, and then of course the verge then is getting well worn away. So this is from last year. You can see already getting a bit muddy, but there's still some green left over. Whereas I can put in this year's, again, finding that mouse, there we go. So this year, the erosion of that verge is just getting worse and more churned up. We have made some contact with the owner of the waterfall site and trying to involve our roads department, because we recognize that something needs to change here to manage this site better. And it's just a matter of trying to get the parties together to come up with some form of plan. And even then, obviously, funding is getting a little bit harder to obtain. So so we'll keep trying to work on this and try and make matters better. As a comparison, I think this was last year, which again is showing some greenery on the left-hand side, which is just getting removed from with constant use. The other site that became a bit of a social media hotspot was Puffin Cove, or otherwise known as Red Point of Drumholliston, which people were parking on the roadside, then trekking across to see puffins on the coast. So you would hope that people would realise that they're not going to be there for half the summer. They'll be there till perhaps July and then disappear. But it seems that people were hoping to see them at all times of year. But having said that, I mean, whilst this was a position last year with people parked on the verge and walking along the roadside, some fencing and bunding put in last year. This year it actually decreased. Oops, sorry, went too far. I don't have a photo of it for this year. Whoop. Bit of a slow react. Here it seemed to be, this year seemed less of a problem. The ranger did put in signs when appropriate to warn people of the risk of parking, but also that really, after the end of July, there wasn't really much to see other than the scenery. Certainly no birds. So
Phil,
this, sorry, yes?
Sorry, Phil. Robin's got a hand up. I know you can't see that when you're presenting.
No, I can't. I think, as Kathy said, we could keep questions to the end, if that's all right, Robin. As you say.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just putting myself in the queue for when it comes up.
Okay. Right, I'm almost at the end now as well, so it won't be too much longer. And right, so moving on, canna bean, another one that was an issue sort of just after COVID. These are the photos from that period when it was often up to 50, 60 tents parked at canna bean and the car park completely full. But we've managed this site. Get some photos, firstly with signs and putting up areas of green mesh fencing to prevent camping in certain areas where either the maca was getting eroded or the number of fire sites were getting a bit out of hand. You also see that the path at that point was getting quite eroded. So with a new path put in and handrail, the improvement in the signage and still those green fenced areas. So examples from this year, so this was the start of the season, a number of fire sites still occurring. But by the end of the season, after fencing was around that area, you'll see they're starting to vegetate back over and some improvement there. So that this fencing that I talked about is this green mesh, which kind of blends in at least to some degree. And changes from pretty bad fire scars to at least the vegetation having a chance to recover. See the green mesh there on that site and the vegetation well recovering. By the end of the season, you can see the mesh is deteriorated quite a bit. And sometimes we'll remove the mesh and just put a rope, and it still seems to be sufficient. And that site, as you can see, is very well recovered. Okay, and that's it. Now, just need to end the slideshow. There we go. And I hopefully will be able to see you all in a minute. There we go. Right.
Thank you very much, Philip, as always. I think I know we have people in the queue already with questions and answers. Delighted as always. I do wish this year there had been more funds, that we had the Access Rangers in Caithness as well. As you know, Venture North bang on the door to say how much we appreciate the work, and not just in terms of conversations to correct behaviour, but I actually think the Access Rangers are ambassadors for the area, and I know from our conversations that the chats that they have with visitors, they help move them on. You know, some of them are quite positive. Also, in some context, just for everybody around the room, I was looking at some numbers from, or official numbers from last year. Sutherland, their total visitor numbers was actually over 500,000 in 2023. So disappointing to see some poor behaviour there, but also delighted to see, in terms of a measure of the total number of visitors in the area, in some things it's actually starting to decrease, and I think that is most definitely down to a lot of the work. It's a combination of things, but the service that the Access Rangers provide is key to doing that. So I just wanted to say thank you very much to your team, Philip, for all the work that you do. So I think we will officially stop recording, as I'm not seeing Neve